Hello and welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Nancy Cordes. Thanks for joining us today. We're talking Afghanistan today. General Stanley McChrystal delivered a strategic review of the U.S. war in Afghanistan on Monday, in which he called for a greater concentration of U.S. forces to work closely with Afghan soldiers and police. Essentially, upping our troops there is what he's calling for. Meanwhile, a new CBS News poll shows U.S. support for the mission in Afghanistan is eroding. 4 in 10 Americans now want troop levels decreased. And we're getting new signs that the administration, that officials in the administration fear the results from the contested Afghan election, which are still being tallied, will show a victory for President Hamid Karzai so narrow that it will lead to questions about his legitimacy, further threatening the U.S. efforts there. To talk about all this, I am joined by Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, and John Powers, an Iraq War veteran and founder of War Kids Relief. Thank you both so much for being here today. Michael, I'll start with you and what some people are calling the big news on Afghanistan today. Conservative columnist George Will turning a lot of heads with his call for America to get out of Afghanistan, essentially pull most of the 68,000 troops out, do what the U.S. needs to do with drones and intelligence and that kind of thing. What do you think?
Well, you know, it's a serious statement, and I certainly take it seriously. I don't agree with Mr. Will at all. I think that he's giving up on the strategy far too soon. In fact, I would argue that if you were going to give up on this war, you should have done so a year ago, before we tried this strategy, because once you supported the initial buildup, you were more or less acknowledging that it was going to take a couple of years to have any potential benefit. It takes that long to actually establish our positions throughout the countryside, to build up the Afghan forces. Some of the trainers that President Obama is sending are only arriving this month. And so I think it's a sort of a strange time to give up on the strategy. Again, it's sort of both too early and too late. And I understand why he's doing it now, but I would say we need another year, 15 months to know if the strategy is working. I think it will work because it's time-tested, this kind of counterinsurgency approach, but you know, it's going to take a while.
John, politically, if the president wanted to pull out, could he even do it? I mean, one of the central tenets of his campaign was that he was going to shift resources from the war in Iraq, where you fought, to Afghanistan, that was the war that was worth fighting. Could he even pull out now?
I don't think he could, and I don't think he should. I'm here as part of the Truman National Security Project, and what we've been, what folks believe is that, first of all, the American public, this is on their back burner. The first thing they're thinking about today is healthcare. They're thinking about the fact that Michael Jackson took more of the press in the last part of the summer than anyone talked about Afghanistan. But he's doing the right move of having a comprehensive review of what we need to do. He's making decisions about sending more troops or sending more civilians, where the resources need to go. And the 3 critical pieces, new leadership, a new strategy, and new resources are being put in place. So as Michael said, we can look at the next year and 15 months to determine if the strategy is working.
That's true, but Michael, there is kind of a PR problem here, isn't there? We've got a new CBS poll out today that finds that 4 in 10 people want U.S. troop levels decreased. That number is on the rise. And President Obama's approval rating for his handling of Afghanistan is down to 48%. We're even hearing reported today that Vice President Biden says that without the support of the American people for a prolonged involvement in Afghanistan, they really can't have a long-term commitment there.
Well, that can become circular reasoning, and I think Vice President Biden is technically correct, but if he believes in the mission, I would hope that he would try to help lead public opinion, which President Obama and others are going to have to do. I believe the American public is asking some very legitimate questions. It has not yet been well enough explained what all these additional forces are doing now, what any additional forces would do if sent, what the allies are doing, etc. And so I think that we're going to have to hear a clear explanation. And my own view is that Ambassador Eikenberry and General McChrystal need to come back to the United States and spend 2 or 3 days in congressional hearings and other sorts of public events to explain to this country what they're doing, why they are hopeful that it will work, and that this is not just blind faith in the American military, because this kind of a problem requires, of course, the help of the actual Afghan government. We can't do it on our own, so the American public has a right to understand why commanders and leaders believe the strategy will work. I think that's the essence of the public relations problem and of how you approach it. You have to explain what we're doing to people in much more detail with the people who are on the ground carrying it out.
Okay, so then I'm very curious to hear how both of you think this really could work, what the way forward is, because you hear so much pessimism lately about how Afghanistan could turn into another Vietnam, and no matter how many troops you send there, that it will never be enough because you're fighting an enemy that has a million places to hide, is always changing. So what do you do, and what's victory in a place like Afghanistan?
Well, one of the biggest challenges I face is there's no one single Taliban out there that we're fighting. There's no unified Taliban. There's each community has a different fight, and I think General McChrystal recognizes this. I think he's empowering his junior officers and his NCOs to go out, but he's also empowering a group of citizens or civilians to go in there and do the reconstruction projects and the capacity building that will support the new Afghani government and make sure that people see it as legitimate and people see it as someone that will secure them. But the president also has to explain, as Michael talked about, how this war plays into the regional aspect. And I think this new strategy talks about Pakistan and Afghanistan together in a way that the Bush administration never talked about, and realizing that Afghanistan is critical to the stability of Pakistan and moving forward there. And it's going to be really very important from a PR perspective for them to get that message out there.
Michael, how do you define victory and how do you achieve it?
Well, the simplest way to define it for me is to give the Afghans themselves the tools to keep fighting the fight on their own, or at least more and more on their own. In other words, we don't have to defeat these various Taliban that Jonathan just described. We have to certainly cap their spread, and right now they are spreading too much. So we have to help the Afghans do that. But ultimately, this is really about building up Afghan capacity, building an Afghan army and police and justice system in particular that can provide law and order and security. The good news is we're seeing elements of success, but it's at far too small of a scale. The Afghan army is looking pretty good right now, but it's only got 90,000 soldiers. It needs to be more than twice that size. The Afghan police needs to be cleaned up. It has too many people affiliated with the narco-criminal networks and, to some extent, the insurgents. So you're going to have to reform the police, build both the police and army and justice systems up. And that's the trajectory we finally are on, because we finally have enough American resources to do the training and mentoring and partnering that's required. So the essence is building up Afghan capacity.
And how long do you see this trajectory taking? Because we have been there for 8 years, and as you know, the U.S. military is incredibly stretched.
Well, I would begin by saying we didn't even try for most of these 8 years to build up this capacity in a serious way. We tried to keep it very small because we were under the misimpression that we had to give the Afghans only something they could afford, even if it wasn't enough to win the war or consolidate control of their country. Now we've realized, if we have to pay a little bit of money for a while, that's much better than losing the war or having Americans do the fighting. And so in the last 1 year or so, we've gotten increasingly more serious. I think it's going to take 3 to 5 more years of the new level of effort before we've really gotten to the point where we can downsize.
John, do you agree with that, 3 to 5 years?
I'd agree to that, and I think finally we have the eye back on the ball in Afghanistan. The Bush administration took the eye off the ball. We were focused on Iraq. All the resources went there. We're finally, these new troops are talking about bringing to the table, are going to be training the police that Michael talked about, training the troops that Michael talked about, and I think that's incredibly important to the security of Afghanistan.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, John Powers of War Kids Relief, Michael O'Hanlon of Brookings. Thank you both so much for talking about this very difficult topic.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Now we move to an update on CBS News correspondent Cami McCormick, who was seriously injured in Afghanistan last week. Vice President of CBS Radio News, Harvey Nagler, is with Cami and her family. Here's his report.
Her condition is fairly stable. Fortunately, there are no head injuries or anything of that nature, and that because she was wearing protective gear at the time, as all reporters do in the field, and so the extent of injuries is mainly to her arms and legs. She suffered some extensive fractures of both the arms and the legs. We know that her vital signs are good, and she'll be taken to Walter Reed, where they'll do further evaluations and figure out what comes next as far as Cami's health is concerned.
That's the latest on CBS News radio reporter Cami McCormick's condition. Finally, before we leave you, CBS News' Lara Logan and Don Lee got a chance to hear firsthand from some of the Marines on the front lines at combat Operating Base Sharp in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. We're going to leave you with that. I'm Nancy Cordes. This is Washington Unplugged.
They were, looks like 50 pounds of explosives packed in some steel tubing. Break.
It's just scary, sir. A little surprise for us.
What do I miss the most? My kids in my truck.
How about you?
I'd say my wife and my daughter, and my Harley.
Excellent.
How about you, Matthews? What do you miss the
I
most?
miss dry land a little bit.
I'm going to Ben Chili Bowl. It's the first thing when I go home. It's you gotta go, Paz. We gotta go.
All right, we'll go. Mine? What I'm gonna eat? I'm probably gonna eat at Olive Garden. Honestly.
Or my wife.
What is it? Texas Roadhouse? The jalapeno poppers?
Money.
Back home, my favorite meal is probably fish and lobster.
Arroz con pollo, rice with chicken.
Steak.
What do you eat?
Chicken fajita. Yeah.
Pretty much the best food we get around here.
What would you like to be eating?
Prime rib.
What do people don't know about this place?
It's hot.
And
It sucks.
One more time. This is what we do. One more time.
I know.
Let's show them. Bam. Come on.
What is
One more
that?
time. Bam. There we go.
You got
Tell them that's an American handshake. Give me one. Oh. Let's go. You ready to go? Let's pull out. Let's go.